Chapter 4. A Brussels Sprout Up Each Nostril. The next morning at break, Bob stole off to the library. It was his favorite place in the whole of Groddington School. The library offered peace and quiet from the bullies who teased him for his funny faces. Bullies are never into books. Reading makes their brains hurt. In the corner of the library reserved for books about animals, Bob found what he was looking for: the Whopping Book of Fish. It was sandwiched between the ginormous gorilla book and the really too big book of ants. Bob sat cross-legged on the library floor, skimming past the well-thumbed pages on the deadly fish that children are always drawn to: the sharks, piranhas, and stingrays. The boy finally found an entry for the blobfish. In such an enormous book, it seemed unfair that this particular fish was given so little space. It had barely more than a postage stamp-sized entry. Bob had to squint to read it. In the very few lines of description, Bob learned that the blobfish was a deep-sea fish with a body made up of jelly. The final sentence in the entry read, "The blobfish is considered to be the ugliest animal in the world." Bob felt sad for a moment. What an awful thing to be best at! Ugliness. It wasn't the fastest, the cleverest, the biggest, the smallest, or the deadliest. It was the ugliest. No wonder nobody who visited Sir Basil's zoo stopped to look at the thing. Except, of course, that one little girl who vomited her alphabeti spaghetti all over the tank. Just as Bob was about to put the book back on the shelf, he felt a long shadow cross his face. Looking up, he realized that looming over him was Stubbs, with his gang behind him. I say looming. Stubbs was only slightly taller than Bob when Bob was sitting down. Stubbs was the shortest boy in the whole school. Maybe that's why he turned into a bully, to show everyone how powerful he was, even though he only came up to the teacher's knees. It was as if a 10-ton truck had been dropped on his head, squashing him. But he was the hardest child in Groddington School, which was full of hard children. Stubby Stubbs was even harder than Brutal Brian, Fierce Vanilla, Terrible Tamika, Nasty Natalie, Cruel Colin, Vicious Victoria, Rough Ramesh, Wicked Will, Heartless Helen, Ruthless Ruth. Bob stood up and realized he was now a fair bit taller than Stubbs. Still, Stubbs scared him. "Hello, Blob," said the bully. "Ha, ha, ha!" Stubbs's two henchmen, Gauze and Boz, laughed, even though Stubbs had called Bob Blob 1,000 times before. It hadn't been funny the first time, let alone now. "We looked all over school for you," said Stubbs. "What is this strange place? I've never seen it before." "It's the library," replied Bob. "What's that all about, then?" "It's a home for books." "What are they all about, then?" Bob looked around the shelves and shelves of books. "I'm not sure I've got time to go into all that, but it's been smashing to see you three." The boy tried to pass, but the bullies blocked his path. "What you readin'?" demanded Stubbs, snatching the book off him. Stubbs's stubby fingers tore at a page, and in his hands was the picture of the blobfish. "Ha, ha, ha! Look, boys," began the bully. "Blob's reading about himself." Stubbs's gang of 2 looked over their leader's shoulder. "I don't get it," said Boz. Stubbs looked embarrassed by his gang's thickery, but pressed on. "Well, we call Bob Blob, and this here is a blobfish," he explained. "Oh, yeah," said Gaz. "I still don't get it," said Boz. Stubbs shook his head wearily, but pressed on with the bullying. He held up the ripped-out page next to Bob's head. "Spot the difference! Ha, ha! I can't!" exclaimed Stubbs. The henchman looked confused. "One is a boy," began Gaz, "and the other is a piece of paper with a picture of a fish on it," continued Boz. Bob sighed. This was just the latest in a long list of horrible things the Stubbs' gang had done to him. There was the time when they put a large spider in between 2 pieces of bread in Bob's lunchbox. Bob would never forget when the gang made him drink tea from his own sock. Or the time when they buried his homework in the football field. There was also the time when the gang forced him to eat a cracker smothered in their own foot cheese. And who could forget the day when the Stubbs gang made Bob walk around school with a Brussels sprout in each nostril? Poor Bob looked like he had 2 giant bogies hanging from his hooter. There was the time when they tricked Bob into thinking it was dress-up day at Grottingham School. The boy came dressed as a robot, wrapped in tin foil, while everybody else was in a school uniform. And the day when the gang thought it was hilarious to fill his school bag with custard. One time, they put a loo seat over Bob's head and made him pretend to all the other children it was a trendy new scarf. Bob had got into trouble when they scratched "Bob was 'ere" on the headmistress, Miss Vere's office door. And of course, there was the day they made Bob put 2 footballs down the back of his trousers so it looked like he had a massive inflatable bottom. "Ha, ha!" Stubbs pressed on with his joke. "Spot the difference! I can't!" Bob knew that Stubbs wanted to upset him. Like all bullies, what Stubbs loved was to make his victims cry. But the boy had an idea. He wouldn't cry. He would laugh.